Okay, we're connected. You may begin.
All right. Good morning, everyone. I'm Dave Anderson, and I serve as chair for the Kansas Behavioral Sciences Regulatory Board. Today is Monday, January 12th, 2026. I ask the members of the board to respond to a roll call to signify their presence at this open meeting that is being conducted in hybrid form, with some individuals remote by conference call or other electronic medium, and some individuals present at the board's office. Denise Seisman.
Present.
Jill Blessing.
Present.
Linda Heights Powell.
Present.
Dawn is absent, right? Mary Jones.
Present.
Jim Kilmartin.
Present.
Richard Nobles.
Present.
Andrea Perdomo Morales.
Present.
Cynthia is absent. Laura Shaughnessy.
Present.
David Stevens.
Here.
I note the following staff members are also present: David Fye.
Here.
Leslie Allen.
Here.
Cindy DeArcol.
Here.
Tim Resner, serving as legal counsel for the board, is also present.
Here.
Next, David Fye will read a message concerning this meeting being held remotely.
Thank you, Dave. This is David Fye, Executive Director for the Kansas Behavioral Sciences Regulatory Board. Public comment allows the public to address the board about any concerns, but the Kansas Open Meeting Act, or KOMA, does not require the board to provide public comment or answer questions from individuals. Individuals requesting to provide public comment could contact the Executive Director prior to the meeting by sending an email to david.fye@ks.gov. No time has been reserved for public comment, as no individuals requested time for public comment. Because we are conducting this public meeting in hybrid form, I state for the record the following information. Access to this meeting is being conducted in person and by medium of interactive communication that allows members of the public without cost to attend the meeting, either in person or through the use of the conference call or by viewing the board's YouTube channel. While the meeting is conducted in hybrid form, the requirements of KOMA are not suspended. As such, we will be conducting this meeting pursuant to the KOMA. On December 10th, 2025, we sent notice of the board meeting to all individuals who had requested notice of such meetings. The notice is also posted on the board's website, ksbsrb.ks.gov. You may obtain a copy of the notice at that website. An agenda and other meeting materials have been posted on the board's website and are available for review. You may also request a copy of the agenda specifically by sending an email to david.fye@ks.gov with the subject line request for the agenda, and it will be sent to you. The notice contains information for the conference call and YouTube channel that allows the public to attend the meeting free of charge. The notice also states that if there are any technical issues during the meeting, you may send an email to bsrb@ks.gov. A recording of the meeting will be available on the BSRB YouTube channel following the conclusion of the meeting by using the link to the meeting on the agenda. And we did check the conference call line before we got started. There's no one currently on the conference call line, but if someone be so or introduces themselves, we will let you know.
Thank you, Dave. The meeting is now called to order, and the board will begin its discussion of the first item on its agenda. So we need a motion to approve the agenda.
So moved. So moved.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor of the motion, please say aye.
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 Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Thank you. No public comment. So we'll move to review and approval of the minutes. Everybody had an opportunity to review the minutes from November 10th, 2025. Any updates? Any changes? Okay, seeing none, I'd entertain a motion to approve the minutes.
So moved.
Second,
I second.
thank you. We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor of the motion, please say aye.
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 Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Thank you. Okay, Dave, take us to the executive director's report.
All right, thank you, Dave. We'll go ahead and start off with some operations updates and then some legislative updates, and then just some general updates after that. First, starting with operations, I did want to make you all aware as board members that, over the years that I have been working for the board, we've been fortunate in that as licensees have continued to increase over the years, we've been able to expand our staff. A lot of the initial focus when I first became executive director was on finding efficiencies with our licensing process. And I think we've been able to really make some good changes and have some staff members that have been really productive in those areas. One area of focus that we're moving towards in 2026 will be focusing on the investigation and disciplinary side of the office. So I just wanted to let you know over the course of this next year, one of the big changes in terms of our staffing assignments, we have 2 staff members that have mostly had responsibility for licensing over the past few years, and we're going to start to include them on some of the investigation and disciplinary processes to provide some additional support to our investigators. We want to make sure that we're going through the investigations in a timely way, and also to make sure that our investigators are supported and that they have some additional assistance. And then also we're making a change internally in terms of our staffing assignments to make sure that individuals have essentially a partner for coverage purposes. So we have a lot of specialization in the office that has been sort of historical for many years, where there would be a primary person who would be working on, social work applicants, someone else who would be the primary person on, let's say, marriage and family therapy applicants, and that has worked really well. But you may, as from time to time, people take extended vacation or there's something unexpected that might happen. We want to make sure that there's no issues in terms of continuity of operations. So I've been working with Leslie and looking at staffing assignments, and we basically already had conversations with staff members in terms of who they're going to essentially be working with to learn the operations in a new area to be a coverage partner. And so we'll be implementing these over the next year as well. So I just kind of wanted you to know that behind the scenes, you may not see very much of this from the outside, but internally, I think this will make us more secure in terms of having individuals trained in different areas. Cross-training is always good. But then also, I wanted to make you aware that we're turning in a different area and providing more supports in terms of the investigation and disciplinary side of the office too. So that'll be something we'll be working on over the course of the next year. In terms of outreach, I always like to provide an update on the BSRB YouTube channel that we use to broadcast board meetings and advisory committee meetings. The current numbers is that we have broadcast live or uploaded after the fact about 230 meetings, and those videos are available on the YouTube channel. They have been viewed over 12,280 times. In terms of other outreach, Leslie and I, the Assistant Director and Licensing Manager for the BSRB, we provide presentations to groups of students, either in person or sometimes remote. And so a couple of these upcoming presentations to students, we will talk a little bit about the responsibilities of the BSRB, how to apply for licensure in a smooth way, and then also give them a little bit of information about what to expect from a disciplinary standpoint in terms of their professional responsibilities as a professional. And so we'll be talking at the Social Work Symposium at Washburn University on February 6th. We'll also be doing a remote presentation to counseling students at Central Seminary. That'll be on February 25th. And then we have some additional ones later this spring, but I just kind of wanted to make you aware of some of those. We tried to make sure that we shuffle those in, especially in the spring semester when people are getting close to graduation. Concerning our 2025 survey of licensees, I did want to let you know that we have been working hard to finalize those reports. We have decided to add 3 new sections, and those some of them have already been added. Some of those are in the process of being written, but we are adding an executive summary to those reports so that you will have a quick summary of the main findings from those reports. Also, a table of contents that list each of the questions for the survey, so you'll be able to identify that in those reports as well. And then also a section towards the back before the appendices that talks about conclusions and survey recommendations. And so because we're adding those new sections to the report, it's taking a little bit longer, but I do think that is the next logical step. And I think since the advisory committees, or most of them, have had a chance to talk about some of those questions, we've had a chance to analyze some of that information. So I think in making sure that these reports have some significance moving forward, I think those would be important to add in there. So I just want to let you know that's where we're at with these reports. That's in the process of being added. And then the comparison report is still something that we will bring towards you for you to take a look at. We're trying to tie up those initial reports first, but I think these new sections will be nice as a way of having these stand on their own as well. In terms of another operating update, you may not have heard too much information about this next item, but a few years back, the legislature passed a bill. The part of this bill allowed us to enter the Acela licensing platform line. And so that has been something we've been really excited about moving to the new system. But also included in that bill, the state of Kansas was developing a unified license verification portal. So this does not affect the current verification portal on the BSRB website, but what the state of Kansas wanted to develop was a unified portal where that someone, let's say from out of state, could come to this one website and look through all the professions that are licensed in Kansas and could see if someone is licensed, and if they are licensed, under what agency they're licensed or what profession. And so we've been working with our licensing host for the Board of Healing Arts. I'm happy to report that our licensees have been uploaded to the Unified License Verification Portal that can be accessed at Pro License Verify altogether, prolicenseverify.ks.gov. So if you wanted to take a look at that, we are meeting the standards the state of Kansas outlined for all agencies to come under that. So that is something we worked at towards the end of last year, and we are up there right now. So if you do have any questions about that, please let me know, but I just wanted to bring that to your attention, kind of put a spotlight on that. I want to thank Leslie and also our partners in the Board of Healing Arts for helping to test that data and make sure that it was uploaded correctly. Moving next to some budget updates. So, the BSRB as a state agency has a yearly budget. I put together planned expenditures on behalf of the agency, try to do projections based on revenue for the agency. And then the legislature during the legislative session will review that in front of a House committee that deals with budgetary items. And then also usually the Senate does the same. And then the legislature sets a yearly limit on how much the agency can spend from available funds. For different types of agencies, the legislature may actually give money to those agencies to operate. For the BSRB, as a fee-funded agency, we operate based on the license revenue we receive. So instead, they set a limit for us of our available funding. Over the past few years, I've tried to keep things at a pretty high level. Before I became executive director, I spent about 8 years with the Legislative Research Department as a principal fiscal analyst. So I live very much in the weeds when it comes to a budgetary process, but I realized that's not what a lot of people want. And so in an effort to try to provide helpful information, but not get so bogged down, I've stayed pretty high level. But I've received a couple comments from board members. They would like more information about some of the budgetary items, and I'm happy to go into those areas. So I'll provide a little information for you today. Over the course of the next few meetings, we can dig deeper into any of the areas that you would like us to go into. But just to kind of let you know, we have one fund for the agency. So I mentioned we don't receive any money from the state general fund for operations. We have one fund where we receive mostly license revenue. It gets deposited into the BSRB fee fund. And then over time, we keep an eye on the balance in the fund. If the fund goes too low, we would need to consider something as far as fee increases to make sure that we don't run too low and can't prevent operations. If the balance gets high, then at times the legislature may provide direction and say, we would like you to lower the balance in your fund. And so several years back, the board of the BSRB did implement some fee decreases. I believe these were in license renewal fees. This was before I became executive director, so I think it was 2019. But in 2020, in the years that followed, we had some short-term savings, primarily because of the pandemic. For example, we were not able to hold meetings in person, so some of the travel reimbursements for attending meetings, some of the other costs of attending meetings at the national level and different things like that. There were some temporary savings that were not sustainable, but it did impact the effect of some of those fee decreases the board had implemented back in 2019. So in 2023, we did implement some additional fee decreases. Some of these were to temporary licenses. We also added some staff members during this time. And so in terms of the historical balance of the BSRB fee fund, you can see there that in January of 2023, it was about 2.2 million. The next year in January 2024, it was down just a little over 2 million. In January 2025, about 1.9 million. And now as of January 2026, it's about 1.798. It is decreasing steadily over time. This was by design by the board. The board wanted the fee fund balance to go down. Additionally, we have put forward the fee decreases the board has agreed upon in addition to the other fee decreases. So the board also wanted to lower the amount of original license fees. And we also had some other fees related to some of the multi-state compacts. And so those were put before the Department of Administration for review. I understand we've received some comments and corrections back from that office, so we'll be making those and resubmitting those. And then those will need to go before the Attorney General's office for review. And then once those are approved, we're hoping to be able to implement those sometime early this spring. But those additional fee decreases are basically estimated to decrease the balance by an additional $75,000 per year on top of what the balance is already looking like. So one of the nice things too is that the original projections for the impact of the fee decreases looked at historical increase in licensing and took that into account. I'm happy to report that in recent years, the number of new people that are getting licenses under the BSRB just continues to increase. So that is a really positive thing for the state of Kansas. But if you're wondering maybe why the fee fund balance hasn't gone down even more sharply, I would say part of that is because the success in having more people licensed by the board. So, but I do want you to know, if you are curious about this topic or you hear comments, this is the information that I recently provided to the budget committee from the SMART system, that's the state accounting system. And it is also the same information provided by the Legislative Research Department. So if anyone has questions about the fee fund balance, you can assure them that the balance is steadily going down each year, and it should go down even more than this once those additional fee increases or fee decreases are implemented. And just as a reminder too, as I said, if the fee fund balance goes down too much, the board would have to consider adjustments to make sure that there's stabilization. So that is one of the reasons why when the board did this latest round of fee decreases, the motion was to decrease fees for 5 years. And then during that time, the board could monitor the balance. And if it's something that can continue to be sustained, the board could put forward a change to lengthen that time period or do some other action. But there is language in the current regulations that we had submitted that would limit this to a 5-year decrease. So there is a check in place. So that should help. And then as we talked about before with the multi-state compacts, we know that's going to affect the license revenue that we were receiving. We don't know the full extent of that, but it should affect it as well. So hopefully by the time that 5 years is up, we will have more information on that topic as well. Moving next to some legislative updates. The legislative session for 2026 has officially began. This is the first official week of the legislative session for Kansas. Every spring, it runs for about 90 days. And during that time period, committees meet, including the budget committees that I talked about, but there's also committees that focus on general topics and pass bills and legislation. Today is mostly a day for, I think, swearing in and procedural type things. Tomorrow, I think, is the first day that some of those committees can start meeting as legislative committees. I will send you weekly updates in terms of legislative activities. So I try to keep an eye on any bills relevant to the BSRB. Also, we are going to be asked to provide testimony. Try to give you updates on that as well, so you can view those meetings on the legislative YouTube channel or different things like that. I did want to make you aware, this is the second year in a biennium. So the legislature usually does 2-year sessions. And if there were any bills that were introduced last year that did not officially die, then they would still be available this year for possible action. So there's also going to be new bills that are introduced this year. One bill that I was just made aware of this morning, it's a pre-filed bill, so it hasn't been introduced, hasn't been assigned to a committee. That is House Bill 2420. And as a real short summary, it's a 2-page bill. It would require school districts to obtain parental consent prior to any school-based mental health services being provided. So again, it's House Bill 2420. It was introduced by a member of the legislature, Representative Steele. But I don't know too much about this bill. I just kind of wanted to bring it to your attention based on its timely pre-filing. What usually happens if a bill gets pre-filed like this is it would be assigned to a committee, and then it would be up for that committee whether or not there's a hearing on the bill.
What,
terms-
what number was that, David? Sorry.
House Bill 2420.
2420, thanks.
And as I mentioned, it's a real short bill, just 2 pages, but 1 page front and back. But I want to bring it to your attention so you can monitor that. In terms of our responsibilities as an agency, traditionally what happens with the budgetary process, I mentioned the agency submits a budget or a revised estimate of a budgetary expenditures. Those are reviewed by the governor's division of the budget, also the legislative research department working for the legislature. The governor's budget recommendation usually would come out this week as part of the legislative session. On Tuesday evening, I believe there's going to be the governor's state address, and usually the governor's budget report comes out that next morning in a joint session of House Appropriations and Senate Ways and Means. This year is the second year the legislature has kind of taken their own approach to the budget. So in years past, the traditional method has been agencies submit budgets, the governor makes recommendations, and the legislature uses that as their starting point and makes further adjustments. Last year, what the legislature decided to do was to go ahead and make their own budget bill based on recommendations, and then to have that as their starting point. So that's what they're doing again this year. Legislature had some interim committees that met, and they're going to be putting out their own budget recommendations and then kind of working from that. So they did have some special committees that met last week. This is an unusual process. Usually the session begins and then the budget committees start to look at the agency budgets. The legislature decided they would have these committees meet the week before session. And so last week we went before the House Higher Education Budget Committee. I provided testimony on behalf of the BSRB's budget. The Board of Healing Arts went after us. A few other agencies went that day. They were not able to make recommendations until the session starts. So sometime this week, I anticipate that committee meeting again, making recommendations on the legislative calendar. It looks like that committee is scheduled to meet on Wednesday and Thursday to make recommendations on budgets previously heard. So I haven't heard specifically what day our budget will be up for consideration, but I expect it will probably be one of those 2 days, either Wednesday or Thursday. Moving last to just some other general updates. In my report, I provided some information on some of the meetings facilitated by the BSRB, and then also some of the other meetings that I attended on behalf of the agency. I did want to make you aware that some of the upcoming meetings include a meeting for the American Association of State Counseling Boards, AASCB. That annual meeting is going to be in Orlando in February. And also the annual meeting for the Professional Counseling Multi-State Compact will be the following day. So those will be coming up here in about a month. And then also one last update I want to make you aware of. We partner with different associations and try to work well with the different state level associations. One item of note that I want to bring to your attention, there's a state level chapter of the National Association of Social Workers, NASW, that organization also has a national chapter. And over the past few months, there have been some restructuring. And so I understand that there have been some changes in terms of how the national chapter would like the state level associations to work together. In Kansas, I understand there is now a shared executive director who oversees both Kansas and Iowa. And this was not the only change. There were several other changes like this where one executive director was asked to go ahead and provide shared responsibilities over multiple sites. On behalf of the BSRB, I did want to let you know, while there is a change in the organizational structure, we do still have ongoing conversations with the state level chapter of NASW. And so we have continued to talk with the chair of that board and work with them and answer any questions and just continue that dialogue. So I just want to make you aware, if you hadn't heard about those changes, I want to bring them to your attention, and then also let you know that we continue to hold conversational meetings with the different associations for the professions at the state level chapter. So with that, I did want to point out in your packet of material, you have an update on the Kansas Fight Sedation Grant Review Board from Jason Hess. We try to provide updates in all board meetings. He's the board's appointee to that association. But with that, I'll end my report and see if there's any questions from board members on any topics I discussed or any other topics.
I did want to say, I watched Dave's testimony to the House Higher Education Committee, and I thought it went really, really well and did a really good job. And I also watched some of the groups that followed him, and then I felt even better about his testimony and how it was received. I think he got some compliments from the chair of that committee, and so kudos, Dave. Job well done.
Thank you.
Any questions or comments? Andrea?
I was just going to echo what you said. I watched that as well, and so many different compliments for David's presentation. And it was short and to the point, and everybody was able to follow it. So thank you, David.
Thank you, Andrea.
I have a comment and a question. Dave, first of all, David, can you send out a link to that testimony? I know it's probably easy to find, but if you have a link, could I look? I'd like to look at it after the fact.
Sure. I'd be happy to send
And
that.
thank you. And the question I have, I know you pay close attention to our budget, and for that I'm grateful. I'm wondering if you have in your mind, we're hoping to see that balance go down to a certain amount. Do you have a threshold in your mind when it would generate conversation or changes to how we generate revenue?
So the legislature has never specifically given agencies a target in terms of kind of what to get down to, but I think based on their conversations in the past, what I think maybe the best approach would be to the fee fund balance down to 1 year of expenditures. And part of the reason I say that is, well, I hope we never have a pandemic. During the pandemic, there were a series of executive orders where licensees, regulatory boards like the BSRB were basically said not to enforce expiration of licenses. So during that time period, a lot of individuals could have continued to practice without renewing their license and also not paying that renewal fee. And so I would never want us to get down too low to where we would endanger our ability to provide operations or have to let staff members go or not pay our bills to different groups. But I think that the target I have in mind, based on just the comments of the legislature, is maybe having that fee fund balance down to 1 year of expenditures. But the nice thing is, while our previous projections had the balance dropping more sharply, we always try to look for efficiencies. And so if there are ways that we can avoid spending money, we always try to do that. So as an end target, I would say 1 year of expenditures, but if we can postpone that or delay that target, I will do what I can to try to do that.
Terrific. Thank you for that. Thanks. That's all I had.
Thank you. Dave also wanted to just say, I appreciate the legislative updates. Those are helpful as well. Any other comments before we move on?
Oh, I just wanted to make one more note too. Sorry, Dave, I forgot to mention this.
No, you're fine.
In the past, we had talked about doing some cards for the chair of the board and the vice chair of the board. And we have received those. So I provided some cards to Dave Anderson, and I'll be getting those to Laura Shaughnessy as well. Basically, they are just going to be helpful if there are situations that come up where individuals talking with the board chair or the vice chair. So I think, as a board, you had talked about that in the past, and just kind of wanted to tie the end on that, just to let you know that those had been received and delivered. And so we have done that. And then in the future, when we have changes to leadership in the board, we'll go ahead and have a certain number of cards made for that purpose as well.
Thank you for that. I plan to put those to use.
Thank you, Dave. We'll move on to updates on multi-state compacts.
Okay, great. Well, let's start with the SIPAC compact, and Richard is the commissioner for the SIPAC compact, but I'll just provide a couple of general comments. And then Richard, if you want to add anything in addition, please feel free to do so. We are a member of the SIPAC compact, the Psychological Interjurisdictional Compact, that's for psychologists. And just the general update I wanted to provide to you is that there is a rule out for public comment. It's an actual item on the new business side of the agenda. So we'll talk about that more when we get to that agenda item, but it would provide a cap to the annual assessments that are assessed on states for individuals practicing under that SIPAC compact. So we'll talk about that a little bit more when we get to that under new business, but I did want to let you know that that is something that was recently put out for review and discussion. And then Richard, do you have any updates on SIPAC aside from that?
Yes, good morning. And can everyone hear me just fine? Great. So the annual meeting for SIPAC was held on November 16th and 17th, 15th and 16th. And that was a meeting in Tucson, Arizona. I attended remotely. There were a couple of notable items on the agenda. One, there was a vote on a rule change when it comes to the educational requirements for psychologists that is not from an APA accredited program. The rule was to codify that individual or psychologists must have had a year of residence at their home educational institution in order to qualify as a practitioner that can apply for SIPAC privilege. Those who graduated from APA accredited institutions are automatically assumed to have met that requirement. There were a couple of other matters that were discussed at the annual meeting. We talked a fair bit about disciplinary processes with respect to those that hold SIPAC privileges and who and what state would be the manager of the discipline if it's being administered. In terms of the number of psychologists that are practicing with SIPAC, there are 18,130 psychologists that hold a privilege to practice telehealth, and there are 1,130 individuals, and this is nationwide, to practice with a temporary permit to do so in person. There are 43 states that are in SIPAC. There are 2 that have legislation in the works, and those are New York and Massachusetts, and those will be pretty significant additions if those go through within the next year and a half. And that is essentially it. Oh no, one more thing. So I was asked if I would be willing and available to serve on the SIPAC's finance committee, and I accepted the appointment. We had our first meeting with me involved last week, and it meets quarterly, and we discussed the long-term investment portfolio of SIPAC and decisions that SIPAC may want to make with respect to investing the dollars that it has. And we meet again in June or July for the mid-year meeting, but there will be other things that will be coming down the line between now and then, and I will provide updates on those as they come. Any questions? All right, thank y'all.
Thank you, Richard. Professional counseling, multi-state compact.
Okay, well, I'll open up this conversation and provide a couple updates. Laura Shaughnessy is the commissioner for Kansas for the Professional Counseling Multi-State Compact. So Laura, after I give a couple updates, I'll turn it over to you if you want to share any additional updates. We are actively working to implement some of the provisions for the Professional Counseling Multi-State Compact. I have met with the executive director for the Counseling Compact to make sure that we have some changes built into our licensing system to track who has basically been able to get a 60-hour degree, which is a requirement of the compact, and then also who has had a background check so that we can pull those sets of information to provide to the compact. We've also been working on the background check requirement We are in the process of completing a new MOA with the KBI, and that has to do with our ability to access the records for people through the background check process. I do think we will probably have that agreement signed sometime this week. Additionally, I mentioned those fee decreases that we had submitted to the Department of Administration. One of the items included in those fee decreases is our out-of-state privilege fee, which does need to be set so that when we do go live, individuals will know how much they have to pay the state of Kansas to get a privilege under that compact. So behind the scenes, we've made changes to our licensing system. We are in the process of reaching that agreement with KBI. And part of that too will be us to identify who will have access to those records. They'll give us information on how they can be trained to access that information and give us clear instruction on how we can save the details if someone has something come up in a background check. And then also that fee needs to be fully implemented. So we're moving towards this one going live. And just to let you know, even though that compact has officially launched, there's really only 2 states that are active in the compact. And I think part of the reason is a lot of states are struggling with implementing the background check requirement. There were a lot of states that did not have that as a condition of licensure, like Kansas. And so even though they did launch that compact in the fall, only 2 states have been able to go live. So we are basically right in line with a lot of the states that are kind of struggling with that, but moving forward too. And just as a reminder about that too, the professional counseling compact, they did break from one of the precedents that SIPAC had set. SIPAC passed a rule that gave states a certain number of years to put the background check requirement into place, and they allowed individuals to practice while that was in the process of being put into place. Professional counselors made a different decision and said, no one can practice until you have this background check requirement in place, which I think has created an issue for a lot of states. So I would hope that maybe if the compact continues to struggle, perhaps they will revisit this issue. But as far as the state of Kansas, even given these, sets of requirements, we are moving forward, and I'm hopeful that we can get the background check requirement put into place sometime in the very near future. So I'll turn it over to Laura and see if she has any additional comments on that compact.
Thanks, David. That was a great summary. He covered all the important points that we're at with the compact. The one thing I would add that we've talked about a little bit is that the 2 states that are active have very different response rates in their state, and we have unofficially attached the reason for that to their fee. The state with the high fee has only a few people who've joined, and the state with the lower fee for joining has a much higher response rate. So we're making up that has an impact, and we have a fee. Our practicing fee is on the low side, so we're really excited to see what happens when we're finally allowed to go live, because we anticipate that means we'll have a higher response rate than maybe some of the other states. That's all I have.
I have a quick question. What's the fee for Kansas for those who wish to get the privilege to practice in those states?
And Laura, do you want me to go ahead and answer that
Sure,
question?
go ahead.
Or?
Sure.
Okay. So it's a different model than SIPAC, but with the professional counseling model, you would need to have a license in your home state, and then you would essentially pay the privilege of the state where you want to practice once that compact is live. So our out-of-state fee would be $25.
And the most expensive state, I think, matched their license fee. Wasn't it like $260 or $250?
Yeah, and states took different approaches, and they're still continuing to have this conversation. I think some states were concerned that they would lose the license revenue from out-of-state licensees, which is a concern. We don't know the full impact once the compact is live in different states. And so as a protection, some states have said, we think this could just be a replacement. So our out-of-state licensees will do a privilege instead of doing a license. And I hope that is not what is going to happen. What I hope for the compact to be successful, what I think will happen is we will see a decrease in the number of out-of-state licensees. But if the privilege fee is low, then it could mean that there's going to be an increase in the number of privileges. So maybe you had someone who was licensed in their home state and then licensed in maybe one other state, but based on low privilege fee, maybe they would become, they would obtain privileges in multiple states. And so this would be better for continuity of care if individuals are going different places, but it would also provide more opportunities for telehealth in different states. So I think if states keep these fees low, which I think a lot of them are planning to do, it'll work out to the best. But a few of them are taking a wait and see approach and saying, as a protection, we want to keep it high. But I think if too many do that, it'll impact the success of the compact.
And you have to have you have to maintain your home state license. So anybody who's here has to have a license. So I think that's another protection that will benefit from, all states will benefit from.
Right.
Any additional comments or questions? If not, we'll move on to the social work multi-state compact.
Okay. And so I'm the commissioner for Kansas for the Social Work Compact. And just to provide a quick update, the Social Work Compact was the most recent that was passed for the mental health professions. This compact is moving faster than the other compacts that have come before it. So I think we've kind of seen how those have worked and it's going very smoothly. I sit as a member on the Rules Committee and also Finance Committee for the Social Work Compact. The Rules Committee has not met this spring, but the Finance Committee is meeting tomorrow. I think we're hoping to start to put together some information on projected cost once the Compact Commission is fully launched, and then trying to figure out how the compact should be funded. So for the Social Work Compact, this is going to operate differently than the Professional Counseling Compact and the SIPAC Compact. Essentially, states would be issuing multi-state social work licenses, and so you would have to have a home state license, but if you wanted to practice in other states, you would get a multi-state license as well. And that would allow you the ability to practice into all the different compact states. But what's not built into that model is how the compact will be funded. So the commission. So if you had an executive director for that compact, if you had legal services, ongoing clerical, website, data system, all those things are going to cost money. And so basically we're going to meet tomorrow and get an estimate of how much the ongoing costs are going to be and probably have some discussion about how the compact should be funded. Personally, what I plan to suggest is I think the social work compact will be very successful when it's launched. I think a lot of people will choose to get a multi-state license. And so I'm hopeful that there can be a small surcharge by the compact commission that we would just receive and then pass back to that commission. And I think based on the projections, I think that would fully fund all operations. And I think separately from the other commissions, I don't think they will need to be a large number of staff. I've said these comments publicly at previous meetings too. But on behalf of the state of Kansas, I'll probably put these forward as part of the finance committee. If you have any additional comments, please let me know. But that meeting is tomorrow. It can be viewed if anyone wants to sit in on that meeting. And then there will be other full meetings of the commission later on this year. They always meet at the end of the year, so it'll be a while before the annual meeting, but this year, hopefully by that point, we may get close to launching the social work compact as well. So things are on schedule, if not moving faster than previous compacts. So I'm happy to report that's where we stand today. Any questions on the social work multi-state compact?
Doesn't look like it. Okay, that takes us to updates from national associations, the American Association of State Counseling Boards.
Okay, and I'll just provide a few updates on these three associations. AASCB is the American Association of State Counseling Boards. We are a member state in that association that assists regulatory boards that license professional counselors. The annual meeting is later on this year. I serve as the treasurer for AASCB. I took over a position and served for a year, and then I was elected treasurer last year. And I've successfully been able to help that association with some investment strategies and have been able to increase their passive revenue with some investments so that they did not have to raise their membership fee last year, because what they would have made from a membership fee increase, we were able to essentially make the same amount from just some investment changes. And so just wanted to bring back that the time that I dedicate to work with the associations is having a productive value. I'm learning a few things myself, but also passing along those savings, not just to Kansas, but other states as well. So you may not see a lot of the work that I do with that group, but I think it is a positive experience. But we are meeting a little bit later this spring in February. And so I'll bring back some updates. And I believe Laura Shaughnessy is also attending that annual meeting as well. And so we'll both collect information and bring it back to you after that meeting. And then do you want me to touch upon the other two associations? Sure. Okay. Also on your agenda, updates from the Association of Social Work Boards, ASWB. ASWB is an association that also helps regulatory boards for the social work profession. You may recall over the past few years, there has been a lot of conversation about their licensing examination, and they have made several changes and have studied lots of different topics and have paid for some independent research, looks at a number of these different topics, and they have been working on making some changes to the examination, but a lot of this was not mentioned in a public session, so we were limited on what we could share. But I'm happy to report in the last few weeks, AASCB did come out with some public updates on their website. They announced that beginning, I believe, in August of 2026, the new examination will be launched. It will cover 3 different category areas as opposed to 4 with the previous examination. They will have fewer test questions. They will have an increase in the number of 3 option multiple choice versus 4. And there's some other changes as well. But there's a pretty good article on AASCB's website. We also have a post linking to that from the front page of the BSRB website. So when that news was made, we went ahead and put that on our front page. So if you would like more information on those changes to the AASCB or ASWB licensing examinations, you can get to that through our website, or you can go to ASWB's website directly. Additionally, for the Association of State and Provincial Psychology Boards, ASPPB, that is the regulatory board association that assists psychology professions or regulators. And the CEO of that association, Marianne Bernetti Atwell, she has made it a priority to go and visit all the different states and provinces and territories that are part of ASPPB over a certain number of years. And we had reached out to her to let her know if she ever wanted to visit Kansas, she would be welcome to come and learn about the BSRB on site. And she informed us that she would like to come to Kansas and meet board members. And so she will be joining us at the May board meeting here in Topeka. So if you are able to attend in person, I would invite you to plan to do so. She is a great representative from that association. I've had some really good conversations with her. And I think any of the psychology board members and also David Stevens, who serves as a public member for licensed psychology and also master's level psychology advisory committee. I think some of you have talked to her as well. So I think it'll be great for the rest of the board to meet her. And so if you are able to do so, she is planning to attend our board meeting in person in May. That'll be the second Monday in May. And if you have any questions about that, please let me know. But additionally, there will be a mid-year meeting for ASPPB coming up this year, likely, I believe, in April, and then an annual meeting. But the big item of announcement today was just to let you know about that special meeting in May that she will be coming to our board meeting. So with that, those are the only updates I have for those national associations.
Thank you, Dave. Questions? All right, we'll move on to staff report.
Okay, and actually, there's a complaint review committee report. Oh, actually, you're right. Staff reports. Okay, this will be sorry. This will be like yeah.
Good morning. The first thing is there's an updated list of the numbers of licensees in your packet. Do you want to talk about it or just let them know?
Just to note that the numbers do continue to increase. So good response.
Yeah. Okay. So we had
We get 17,000. I didn't mean to interrupt you. I'm sorry. We're gonna celebrate when we get 17,000.
Yeah.
That's true. We are getting very close to 17,000. It's 16,928. So I guess we'll have to monitor that and let you know when we
Big
cross
deal,
that.
you guys. It's exciting to see them continue to grow.
I agree.
Good job.
So talking about training plans and There's a lot of confusion over emergency supervisors on the training plans. We have looked and, we feel like it would be best to remove that question from the training plan. It is not a regulation requirement. I think it was just more of a best practice. But it seems to be causing a lot of confusion. So, staff and Dave, talked about it, and we think the best thing to do moving forward is to remove that question from the training plans.
What is the specific question?
It asked the supervisee to list an emergency supervisor, and it says this person is not an approved supervisor, and the letter says only, and still people start using their emergency supervisor as their supervisor.
So is it staff's opinion that having it on there kind of leads people to think that that means if they use that person, they can count those hours as
Yeah,
well?
that's correct. That, yes, we've had several people who have done that. And, we felt like we were being clear, but it's not clear to the licensees, so. When you're reading all these papers, I understand, but.
Do we need to take any formal action on that?
I don't think so. I think if there's any objections by board members or any questions, we want to bring it to your
Sure.
attention, but because the regulation doesn't say that it's a requirement that needs to be on the form, we just want to let you know our plan is to remove it. But if there were any questions, we want it to be a surprise, so.
All right, questions, concerns?
Do you feel like there's clear direction to a supervisee of what to do should their supervisor? I mean, sometimes it needs to be spelled out in detail that if your supervisor is no longer available, suddenly do this. Is that clear?
But there isn't anything in regulation or on the plan. We could maybe put something in the instructions, maybe add a sentence that if your supervisor is unavailable, you'll need to seek emergency supervision.
And forgive me, how is that different than having an emergency supervisor listed? It'd have to be approved by the board, I would imagine.
Well, but an emergency supervisor isn't really approved by the board.
Right,
It's
right.
So it wouldn't be. I mean, we would just be bringing it to their attention that you should have an emergency supervisor, but that person isn't approved. So if the person is not on the form, we're hoping that gets rid of the confusion that they can count those hours.
So Leslie, I think maybe we could add a sentence that would say, if your approved supervisor is unavailable, as a reminder, you're not able to practice independently.
Mhm.
You still need to be under supervision or under direction in certain cases. So maybe something to that effect. Whereas, listing someone specifically, it sounds like has created an issue where people think this is an alternate supervisor. So I
Right.
get hours into this person or alternatively under that person.
And so it really kind of depends. Is it a short-term issue where they just need somebody to practice under till their supervisor comes back? Or, as Jill was kind of alluding to, if their supervisor is now not going to be available, then they really need to go through the process of getting a new supervisor.
Yes, they would need to do a training plan amendment and have a new supervisor approved.
Yeah, I think including both those kind of scenarios would probably be helpful.
I wonder if it's clear that if your approved supervisor is not available, you do need backup supervision, but those hours do not count. That's the part that I'm wondering if people get tripped up on.
Yeah, well, having them on the form, they definitely think that.
Okay,
Because we say on the form, it says this person is not an approved supervisor. They are for an emergency only, and still, when people, when their supervisor's gone or goes on maternity leave or any, number of things, they'll just start using that person like they're an alternate supervisor, and they're not. And so, again, we thought we were being clear, but it's confusing people, so we thought it would be best to just take it off and maybe make a note, like Dave said, that you have to practice under someone, you're not independently licensed. But this person isn't approved and the hours won't count.
There you go. Okay, thank you.
Sure.
That is good for clarity, but what if the supervisor is out on FMLA? Are they allowed to just pick anybody that they would like during that emergency time?
If their supervisor was out on FMLA, they'd have to do a training plan amendment. Because if you're gonna count the hours, they have to be approved by the board. So they should submit that as soon as possible after the supervisor becomes unavailable.
Anybody ever had more than one approved supervisor?
Yes, some people have two, maybe three. Usually it's group and individual, but you can do it however you wish.
Okay. So instead of an emergency supervisor, they could have more than one approved supervisor.
Yes, they can.
Anybody else have any comments, feedback? Are we okay with staff proceeding as they have laid out?
Okay. So the next one is under direction, and it kind of stems from, supervision. So currently, the only place in the regulations under direction is in the definition regulation. And we have a lot of calls and in seeking information about what under direction means, what that looks like. Dave Anderson and I had a discussion because a licensee asked if they had to provide the name and contact information of the person providing them direction to their clients. And since it's in the supervision regulation, I felt like the board felt that was important. And so maybe that should be part of under direction, but it doesn't clearly state that. So in looking at it, I'm coming to you asking, maybe under direction should be its own regulation, kind of like supervision is its own regulation, because I don't think everyone understands they are not independently licensed at the lower levels. And like maybe it's just I probably should do this, but they're not really paying that much attention to it, not as much as I think the board would like. So I was wondering about making it its own regulation or making a supervision / under direction and adding it to it somehow. I don't know which would be better, but to make it very clear, if you're not clinically licensed, this is what you need to do.
Leslie, I think about some of the things that have come up with that. Would you be suggesting that we put some teeth to it, like some, frequencies, or, it's just so vague out there to say you're under someone's direction. So is that part of this conversation as well?
Yes, I believe it should be. Because it's fine, it's different if someone's working in an agency setting, then they have, some kind of oversight, but there's a lot of people who have private practices, and I don't know that there's not as much oversight as there should be. So yes, I think it should be a little bit more detailed, and maybe the committees could look at it, or, the chair or the board members themselves. But that would be my recommendation, that we make it its own regulation.
I think that's a great idea. I think there's a lot of confusion on the supervisor's part as well, as far as what does that mean and what kind of onus are they taking on.
I agree. I like the idea of having it be its own regulation so that it's clear. I know so many people who did not know about this rule.
Yeah, I agree
We
too.
Put something together and bring back, or,
Yeah,
board to
unless you,
consider.
if there's recommendations of
okay,
what board members would think would be important to be included. I mean, I can take the definition, obviously, and make it into its own reg, but if there's more, like, you know, the name and contact information for the person providing direction in case something goes wrong. If there's more information you think should be in there or regularity, then if you could email that to me, I could start making the regulation.
all right.
Thank you.
Any further comments? Thank you, Leslie.
I have one more thing though, sorry.
Go ahead.
Dave and I talked about it last week, but the agenda had already been up. The last thing is the, in residence, in our regulations for the education, it says that they have to have a certain amount of time in residence, face to face with faculty or core faculty, depending on the profession, for coursework during their master's program. Sorry, I'm getting over something. And I noticed in the LPC, we have a lot of applications, and they're coming from programs where some of the coursework is done in Zoom meetings, but it's not all the course, or it's a hybrid course. And there's no definite amount of time that needs to be face to face. We say it's the coursework. So courses have to be in residence as opposed to 1 hour from each course. But we don't have anything firmly in place. And I was looking under, LPC defines a semester hour as 13 hours of didactic classroom instruction. So in the old days, seat time. Is there something that would the board consider having some kind of definite amount of time that needs to be spent in face-to-face contact to make a course be considered in residence? And it's important because even schools where they go mostly on campus, they do have, hybrid courses, and some of those courses may be the ones that we require to be in residence. And it's just difficult when I'm speaking to educators to help them understand what exactly we're looking for. So I didn't know if using that 13 clock hours would be acceptable, or if that's too much.
And Leslie, just to clarify, so face-to-face would be in person, or is face-to-face like you could do it through Zoom like we're doing and we're seeing each other's faces?
But by Zoom or in person.
Okay, thank you.
So talking about, there is one that has to be in person, but it could be either or.
I certainly like having a limit. I like having a limit that matches what a person would need to experience in a classroom. It doesn't seem like those should be really different.
So it would be, as an example, that'd be 13 hours for a semester. Less common in this part of the country is the quarter system, really popular on the West Coast when it comes to at least psychology graduate programs. Would we want to see if there needs to be any augmentation to the number of hours if an individual comes from a school that's on the quarter system?
Yes, what we have a, excuse me, we have a definition of like how much a quarter hour is, like 0.7 semester hours. So I mean, we could play with it and get a number. Yes, we need something for that. But that's for 1 hour. So that's 13 seat hours for 1 semester hour. So for a 3-hour course, it would be more than that. And I don't know if that's too much if you did 3 hours, if it's a hybrid course. So that's why I was bringing it to the board to ask about that.
Melissa, do you have a proposal for the board?
No, just that we. That's what I was kind of asking because I'm not familiar with hybrid courses. I don't know how much time is spent face to face in a hybrid course. So I think I need a little direction so that I can pass that on to educators.
Okay. Would this be something with the differences by profession that maybe we could have the advisory committees discuss? Maybe bring in some of the educators for some of those groups? Or are you looking for more of a standard across for all professions?
It would be more standard for across the professions, but I mean, if there are educators on the committees, they may have a better recommendation than, So it might be helpful for the committees to look at it, but then the board come to an overall decision about it.
That seems like a good idea. Everybody okay with that? All right. Any other discussion? All right, if not, we'll move on to the complaint review committee report.
Hi, you have a document that reflects statistics gathered regarding complaints received and decisions of the complaint review committee. The second document indicates that we have received 116 complaints for fiscal year 2026. This is the halfway complaint of the 2026 fiscal year. And we'd be pleased to answer any questions.
Thanks, Cindy. Question? All right, hearing none,
Well,
we'll move.
Just a quick question. So it's the fiscal year, right? So this report runs July 1 through June 30.
Yes.
That's
Any other questions? All right, now we'll move on to professions reports, and we'll start with licensed psychology.
Good morning again. The Licensed Psychology Advisory Committee met last Tuesday, and that was the 6th of January, 2026. We had a couple of bigger items on the agenda. One was the continued review of the survey questions, and we wrapped up that review during the meeting. And also we reviewed the remaining regulations so that we can kind of close the book on the review of all of the regulations for psychology. We have one more left. So we are just at the finish line. And as Dave mentioned earlier, there will be an item that came up in the review committee during the meeting, and we'll vote on that. In our next meeting will be next month, and that is Tuesday, the 10th of February, 2026 at 6 p.m.
Thank you, Richard. Social work?
Morning social work met on December 9th. But David provided us an overview of the ASWB annual meeting, as well as the compact licensing. We also discussed our licensee survey that we did. Additionally, we talked about the reorganization within NASW that David spoke to us about as well. We will continue to review regulations at the next meeting. We did change our cadence, so we will be meeting on the first Tuesday of every other month. So our next meeting will be February 4th. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrea. Professional counseling.
Thank you, David. The Professional Counseling Advisory Committee met on December 4th. We continue to review the survey of licensees, and it's so helpful. It really helps our new advisory committee members kind of get up to speed and know what some of the important conversations are that are going on in our state with licensees. So thank you for taking the time to, spending time with that in the advisory committee. I got a lot of feedback about the value of that. We looked at the regulation about consulting with a physician to determine symptoms and mental disorders. And we asked for more definition about that. We're going to consider how we think that needs to be implicated with behavioral health. We also looked at the Ohio example for the change in licensing requirements. Ohio allows the lower license level. They have 2 license levels like we do, and they allow the lower license level to either to take either test in order to begin the professional licensing process. And then they don't require one at the higher level. So we were looking at that, and we'll continue, excuse me, to discuss if we want to make any changes. We discussed other coursework, requirements, and then we decided to try to find a date and time to continue to meet in the future because so many things have changed, and David Fye is working very hard to find common ground between everybody on the advisory committee. So we don't have a date scheduled, but we will for 2 months, or I guess that'll be in February sometime. I know we'll get there. That's all I have. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Laura.
Thank you.
Master of Psychology, we met on December 3rd. We welcomed a new advisory committee member. Continued discussion on draft survey report of licensees, a couple of areas of note, a lot of positive feedback around interactions with BSRB staff. That was good to see. Some support in the feedback for an alternate pathway to licensure. And then there were issues raised that are kind of outside the scope of the BSRB, issues around reimbursement, practicing in other states that led to good discussions about the importance of BSRB, making sure people understand who we are, what we do, and what we don't do. Continued review of regulations, trying to clean up some language to make it consistent with other professions, and a continued discussion on the regulation of AI and alternative pathways to licensure. Our next meeting is on February 4th. Marriage and Family.
Yeah, the Marriage and Family Therapy Advisory Committee met on December 12th, and we also talked about some continued discussion on their survey responses, in particular ways, had discussion around ways in which the respondees felt like the BSRB could protect and serve licensees more. So that was a good discussion there. We did continue to review regulations, which I think will all be discussed later on today, and then continue conversations about AI and the importance of keeping that conversation going, and looked at some sample states who are already moving in that direction. In terms of new business, we had some discussion around some safety issues for practitioners, just being mindful of the environment that people are working in now. And so we'll continue to have some conversation around that, but there were some issues raised by advisory committee members around that topic, staying safe in your practice. And then had some general discussion about what kind of topics we'll be bringing up in 2026. We did schedule our next meeting for February 13th at 10 a.m.
Thank you, Mary. Addiction Counseling.
The Addiction Counseling Advisory Committee was due to meet in December, but due to multiple scheduling conflicts in the month of December, we were not able to meet. So actually, we are meeting tomorrow at 10 o'clock by Zoom, and David Fye and I are meeting later today to set and finalize the agenda. So I will have a more comprehensive report at our next board meeting.
Thank you, Jill. Behavior analysis, Linda?
Yeah, the Behavior Analysis Advisory Committee met on December 12th. As with other groups, we continued to review the survey and the different comments, as well as the use of artificial intelligence. I think I'm going to echo what Dave Anderson said, that based on the results of the survey items, there's a misconception, I think, sometimes out in the field about what the Behavioral Sciences Regulatory Board has authority over, because they also brought up billing and reimbursement and access to insurance and stuff. So I think that could be something that we as a board may put something on the website or something. I don't know, that we might want to consider as part of our educational process down the road. The behavior analysts that are on the advisory committee are pretty vocal with regards to the use of artificial intelligence in practice. So we had a lot of discussion on that, and there are some additional documents that were sent out this time, so it will also be on our agenda for our next meeting. Because we spent a significant amount of time on artificial intelligence, we did not get to review the regulations or alternative pathways to licensure. So those will continue to be on our agenda for our next meeting, along with discussion on title protection for behavior analysts, because that's not exactly what our legislation contains. And so just thinking about that and coming up with different topics for 26. In 2026, we're going to continue to meet on the second Friday of every other month from 1 to 3, with our next meeting scheduled for Friday, the 13th in February.
Thank you, Linda. Anybody have any questions or comments for any of the professions? All right, not, we're scheduled for a 10-minute break. 11:20. We'll plan to be back at 11:30.
Okay.
Laura, were you talking? You're muted.
Oh, I was talking to myself.
Oh,
David,
Laura,
I'm
I
gonna-
knew that. I just didn't want to embarrass you.
Could you read lips? What was I saying?
Now, I'm not going to tell.
Thank you.
David, I'm gonna switch now that we've got the internet back up at my office. I'm gonna switch to my computer, so you may have to let me back in the meeting.
Keep an eye on the waiting room. So I think we are back.
Okay, give David a minute to rejoin us.
Okay.
Everybody have a good holiday.
I think he is back in the meeting now.
All right. There he is. Okay, well, we'll get started with back on our agenda. We're on old business and a discussion on possible legislation for 2026.
Okay. And I just wanted to bring this item back to the board. So you may recall last fall, we had discussions in terms of possible legislation, and there were a handful of items the board was interested in pursuing. And because of some technical deadlines and different things like that, we were not able to introduce the bill during the 2025 legislative session or have that go in front of committees. We talked a little bit more about those topics in the fall, and we're trying to decide if it would be, the right time to bring some of these items forward, if some of these items could perhaps be addressed in a way that wouldn't involve legislation, or whether, given the quick pace of the legislative session, whether it would be the right year to request introduction of a bill and move forward on some of these items. And just kind of wanted to report back to you. What I am hearing from members of the legislature is that this session is expected to go very, very quickly. I have also been cautioned by some members of the legislature that if you don't need to introduce legislation, it may be a good idea not to do that this year, just because you may recall that there were some issues with some of the operations for the Board of Nursing. Some of the legislative committees, looked at some of the operations for that agency, and some members of the legislature maybe said things to the effect, or what my interpretation was anyway, in my just conversations with them, that perhaps if we introduced a bill and we didn't necessarily need to have some of those items come forward right now, we could get pulled into things that might make things difficult. And so I just kind of wanted to bring this item for discussion back to the board. I think some of the items that are in the bill, I think are still worthy of going forward. But I'm thinking maybe some of these items could be addressed through some regulatory changes. I think there were a couple of items that we had brought to the board in terms of individuals preparing for the practice of addiction counseling and individuals preparing for the practice of marriage and family therapy. And I think in an effort to kind of clean up those sections of the statute, we had recommended to the advisory committees and to the board that maybe those sections be struck. I am concerned that perhaps going in front of the legislature with good intentions on those items, perhaps it might appear to individuals that we are trying to be limiting on people practicing in the professions at a time to where there is a need for more mental health practitioners. And I know that this is not something the board is doing to be overly restrictive. It's really trying to make sure that we have clear standards of who can practice. But I am concerned that maybe this could be an item that could be misunderstood. Some of the other items, for example, reviewing programs in a way in which if we didn't have an applicant, but someone wanted us to do that and do the review, I've been looking more about what we had talked about, and I think there are still a couple things to be worked out through that process in terms of how much it would cost as far as a fee. We had talked about kind of looking to see how long that would take. And then perhaps, charging a fee at the end of the process after we had done the work. But I think that would lead to some issues. Alternatively, what I think may be helpful is if we voluntarily maybe just looked at a couple of reviews for programs and then gauged how long that took and then brought back more of a clear estimate to the board in future years, that may be something that we can go forward on in the future. But I also think in going through the conversations with the surveys and also on the regulations, I feel like we have more data and feedback from survey licensees in terms of what's important to them. And I think they've identified some topics that perhaps with some additional work, we could have a more robust bill. But I'm not sure that we're ready to move forward on some of those items. For example, we talked a little bit about the continuity of care and the coordination of care with physical medicine and mental health. And I think that item is something probably the board would want to discuss a little bit more additionally. But I don't think we're ready to go forward on something that might involve a bill on that topic, but perhaps in the future we would. I also think some of the items in the bill, when we talked a little bit about the professional counseling item for supervision, in talking with representatives from the Kansas Counseling Association, they had expressed some concern, and I think, as much as possible, we would like to be working with the different associations on certain topics. And so I just kind of wanted to bring this item back to the board. It's my impression right now that given a lot of these different factors, it may make sense to wait an additional year and maybe collect some additional items to bring forward in a more robust bill during the 2027 legislative session. I do work for all of you as board members, and I do want to, do what you would like me to do. So if you would like me to carry a bill forward and request that it's introduced this year, I will definitely do that on your behalf. I feel like it's my responsibility to kind of listen to all these different groups and then bring back feedback to you, and relay this. So I guess what I wanted to kind of narrow this down to is, given these concerns, I think it may be wise to wait until the next legislative session and have more of a more robust bill that incorporates maybe some of the items from the surveys. However, since we have had this discussion previously, if you'd like me to still go forward on introducing that bill and trying to get hearings on the bill, I'd be definitely willing to do that on your behalf. I just feel like it's my responsibility to also let you know about these concerns too. So I'll turn it over to all of you for discussion. Just going to provide my feedback first.
Mary?
Yeah, David, I think it's well thought out and a good plan. I don't think that we necessarily need to initiate anything. My question goes back to, have any of the associations or advocacy groups approached about other legislation that might impact us?
I have not heard about other legislation. If there are bills that come up, I always try to keep the board informed. If there's an opportunity for us to have the board meet and provide feedback, I'm always happy to do that. In fact, I think it's, in the best interest if a lot of those groups come to the board and work with the board to get support. But I have not heard from any groups that have said, they're drafting bills and they would like to work with the board and work together. So nothing like that comes to mind.
I think it makes sense then, based on what you said. If we can do things through regulation at this point, that seems to be a good approach in my mind.
I support that.
I concur.
And this also includes not bringing forth the addition of a position on the board for a behavior analyst, correct?
And that would be one thing that we wouldn't be able to do through regulation because the statute does specify those positions. But yes, so if a bill wasn't brought forward this session, that would mean that item would also not move forward right now.
Correct.
And I know the board was very much in support of that. And I think without question, all the board members, voted in favor of including that in the original proposal. But unfortunately, last time we did bring that forward, it was removed from the bill. So there's no guarantee that it would stay in this time either. But I think whenever the time is right for the bill to be brought forward, I think that is an item the board has strongly supported.
I get it.
Other feedback? Yeah, I support that idea too, Dave, although, you know, I'm always aware too that, you know, at some point we're going to have to do this and take our chances, but it didn't sound like there was anything so pressing that we couldn't wait. And I like your idea about those things that we might be able to handle through regulation. Makes more sense to do it that way. Do you need formal action or is consensus enough?
I think consensus is fine.
Okay, anybody opposed? All right, thank you all. That moves us to continued review and discussion on changes to unprofessional conduct regulations.
Okay, and so you may recall we've been working through the different items in the packet of unprofessional conduct regulation recommended changes from the advisory committees. I think at the last time the board had reviewed these, we finished with item 37. So I think we're ready to start looking at item 38, which is on page 11 in your packet. So just kind of to remind board members and anyone who's watching the meeting, these are basically the current language of the unprofessional conduct regulation for all 7 professions. As much as possible, if there were similar items, we tried to put those side by side so the board could see the language to see if there might be an interest in having uniform language across the professions. And then members of our staff also looked at that if there were any suggestions or recommendations on language. Sometimes that is in the most far right column. If there's not a recommendation specifically, then that would be something that we could discuss during the board meeting. But item 38, starting with addiction counseling, I believe in the far left column, it says failing to terminate addiction counseling services if it is apparent that the relationship no longer serves the client's needs or best interest. Some of the other professions make specific reference to those other professions, but I think that could be made more general if you wanted to have general language across. That third column, I believe, is licensed psychology. And for this item, it says failing to terminate a professional relationship if it becomes reasonably clear that the patient or client no longer needs the service, is not benefiting from continued service, or is being harmed by continued service. And then you see the other professions as well. So is there any thought by members of the board as far as if this is an item that we can perhaps make more general and then have standard language across all 7 professions? And if so, is there general language from one of the professions that would be preferred for all?
David, what page did you say it was on?
This is on page 11 and item 38.
Looks like most of the language is no longer serves the client's needs or best interests. Richard, your group has more kind of expansive definition.
Yes, and excuse me, I would be more than okay with adopting the language of the addiction counselors and the others that have similar language.
Any other feedback from the group? Consensus to move forward with that? All right, great.
Well, moving next to item 39, the first item there, the language is in the addiction counseling profession, when supervising, failing to provide accurate and current information, timely evaluations, and constructive consultation. Psychology, the language was failing to provide regular, periodic, written supervisory feedback to the supervisee. The next has a recommended change that was from master's level psychology. supervising in an unprofessional or potentially harmful rather than negligent manner anyone for whom one has supervisory responsibility. And then there was also some recommended language that was a little bit different. I believe that was for the professional counseling profession, supervising or directing in a harmful or negative manner anyone for whom one has supervisory or directory responsibility due to their position as a supervisee or student. So a few different examples here, a couple of different recommended changes. And I believe one of the changes for that master's level psychology advisory committee was to avoid the word negligent. And I think part of that may be that the word negligent has a sort of a general meaning as common language, but it also in the legal community can have more of a specific definition. So if it's not intended to be a specific legal definition, I think that's why that was struck instead of, and so the more general language of unprofessional or potentially harmful was recommended in place of the word negligent. I recall from that advisory committee.
I would add that adding the directory would help, since we're pointing out that providing direction is
So when providing supervision or direction,
Is there, I don't believe there's anything else about providing direction in unprofessional conduct, is there, Dave? That you know of?
Nothing comes to mind.
I think we've been going through and adding direction to most of the other professional conduct regulations as they've been going along, that the board has been adding direction to the other professional conduct regulations.
Yeah, it's interesting because there's pieces of this that's about the feedback loop of providing accurate and timely evaluations, constructive feedback, and then should we look at combining that with, I like that, supervising in an unprofessional or potentially harmful manner, maybe pulling those things together in one. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
other feedback?
Would it make sense to do something like supervising in an unprofessional or potentially harmful manner, which includes failing to provide regular periodic written supervisory feedback?
So having that as an introductory piece and then leading into what's in the addiction. How do people feel about that?
Yeah, I'm not necessarily even saying needing to do written necessarily, although I think that's how most people do feedback evaluations, but I do like the language in timely evaluations and constructive consultation.
And I would say to Denise's question that yes, we could do that in terms of combining them. I would just say to also add that it may include these things and it's not limited to these things, because there can be something that could happen.
There's always some nuance that'll come
Yeah.
up. For sure.
Fair
And
enough.
so Mary, were you saying, like, I'm just going to use, I think the second one over is behavior analysis. I think the first two are identical. So when supervising, failing to provide accurate and current information, timely evaluations, and constructive consultation, semicolon, failing to exercise adequate supervision over anyone with whom the licensee has a supervisory or directory relationship.
Yeah, that would work. Or we could take it the other way, like Denise is saying. You could kind of go first with the with the supervising in a harmful or negligent manner, such as, and then you could do it. But yeah, I think that would be a nice combination.
No negligent.
No, without negligent.
that enough direction to work on something?
I'm not doing this. So.
I think so.
Okay.
Yeah. And we can write something like that up, and if we need to tweak it at the end, we'll bring all these back to you and let you take another look at them, but I think that's pretty good to get that started.
Everybody okay with that?
Mhm.
Very good.
Next item would be item 40. When applicable, failing to inform a client that addiction counseling services are provided or delivered under supervision. The other professions similar. The psychology one says misrepresenting the services offered or provided, which shall include the following acts: failing to inform a client if services are provided or delivered under supervision. So I think the main focus appears to be very, very similar. There's also a note on some of these that services are being delivered under supervision or direction.
Yeah.
So I think that's probably something I would recommend, that we include reference to the direction. Is there support for general language? It appears that most of the language is already pretty general,
Yeah.
but just making it specific across and then making sure direction is included.
Looks at.
Okay, great. Well, let's move to item 41. So this is an item that was only identified in 2 professions. So I guess the question on this, and as we go forward, there's going to be more that fit under sort of this category. Is this something that is appropriate to keep? Or is this something that we need to have added to the other professions? So 41 says failing to inform a client that addiction counseling services are delivered under supervision as a student or an individual seeking clinical licensure. And then psychology says misrepresenting the services offered or provided, which shall include the following. Actually, this is the same language as the one above. So I guess that it appears that addiction counseling has one additional item not found in the other professions. Failing to inform a client that addiction counseling services are delivered under supervision as a student or an individual seeking clinical licensure. So I guess is there
Those are
any
2 different things,
Mhm.
but they're both under supervision. So to me, it's kind of redundant. Am I thinking correctly?
Well, they can get licensed as a student though, right?
So addiction counseling is a little bit different in that there is a temporary student addiction counseling license.
That's
As
true.
the other programs don't. There's a carve out, so you can provide some services as a student, and you wouldn't necessarily fall under the jurisdiction of the board. But for student addiction counselors, this might be relevant for just the addiction counseling profession.
Right.
So with that
And
in mind,
So could it, because it is all about failing to inform, and so could it be just added to row 40, item 40, where it says provided or delivered under supervision, including as a student, including a student clinician or something like that, including student clinicians.
So I think if someone is, I think that would be appropriate. I think we would just want to make sure that there's clarity because let's say if someone is licensed at a lower level and they are taking an advanced degree, but I'm thinking of someone who may be an LBSW who was in a master's program for social work. In that situation, they would fall under the board's jurisdiction because they're a licensee. They are providing services as a student. So I guess it would extend beyond just the student temporary addiction counseling type license. The same with someone who's an LAC and is a master's program. So it'd be okay. We would just want to make sure that people understood there are other times where someone is providing services as a student where they're not under the board's jurisdiction if they're not licensed. So
that's why it feels like having them kind of distinct under the professions where that can occur makes sense. Because every profession has students that are doing internships and practicums that are may be providing services, but they don't fall under the board because they're not licensed.
A lot of I mean, that's in the regulations for education when like psychology and, I think addiction counseling, it says that when the students are in practicum or internship, they have to identify themselves as students. So I thought that was common practice.
Okay. Well, maybe in that sense, it would be okay. Maybe it would be helpful to have this be a standard across the professions.
That was my thought, that under supervision is under supervision, whether you're a student or seeking clinical licensure, you're practicing under supervision.
The difference is, if there was a complaint made against a student who we didn't license, there's really nothing we could do.
Right.
That's correct. As long as it, as long as we knew that they were a student, so if that information was known. But yeah, I think probably given kind of the conversation, is there? I guess there's also a question too of, is it something that it needs to be specific in the rule to let someone know that you are a student under supervision rather than just under supervision?
Well, because theoretically, and if I have a student that I'm supervising and that student is not under the jurisdiction, but I'm providing that supervision to them, I am under board jurisdiction.
That was my understanding as well.
Yeah. And so they may or may not be, but there's still a board course to be able to go to in order to be able to make a report of unethical conduct or unprofessional. Because if it's my student, they can levy a complaint against me.
Is there consensus to go ahead and have this, this language concerning the student under supervision essentially added to the one above it and have it be across the professions? Okay. We'll go ahead and move that one forward. We'll just kind of have it as an adjustment to item 40 rather than its own separate item for 40. The next page, looking at item 42. Failing to report unprofessional conduct of a licensed addiction counselor, licensed clinical addiction counselor, or any individual licensed by the board. The other profession that this was noted would also under behavior and analyst, failing to report unprofessional conduct of a licensed assistant behavior analyst, a licensed behavior analyst, or any other individual licensed by the board.
I think that's in the lead-in for most of the professions, though, even though it's not listed as an item. In the beginning of the unprofessional conduct, it says failing to report unless received.
Kind of like protected means.
Yes. That a licensee or, there's a whole list of
Why is
things.
that section in there?
Yeah,
The-
does anyone know why there's a specific reason for those two licensees, why that's included? Is there a
That's what I-
specific duty for those two licensees?
I'd have to look at their lead-in to see if it's different. Maybe it doesn't include that language.
And I think on that, when we were putting together the regs for this, that we were trying to follow as closely as possible the Behavior Analyst Certification Board's ethical guidelines. And in there is the ethical guidance is that when you observe somebody engaging in unprofessional conduct, that it's your responsibility to approach them. And if that does not resolve it, you report it.
which is not an unprofessional violation for any of the licenses that we have.
Except for us and addiction counseling.
But that's not what that says. We
Failing
do
to
have that violation, failure to report up at the top. But what Leslie just said is there is a reporting that you need to report, and it's not listed here. I just checked. Because the opening violations aren't here.
Yeah, some of the professions have a failure to inform the board about
Yeah,
certain
there we
things.
go, Dave.
Where's that?
It's failure to inform the board of a violation. Tim, can you articulate it better?
What number?
Yes, I think it's addiction counseling and behavior analysts, right? Who we're looking at. So KAR 102-711A5, which is similar to the other profession, says that except when the information has been obtained in the context of confidentiality, failing to notify the board within a reasonable period of time that the licensee or applicant or any other person regulated by the board or applying for licensure has met any of these conditions. And then number 5 has practiced the licensee's profession in violation of the laws or regulations that regulate the profession.
So that's themselves or someone else.
So I think that would be then duplicative double P there in item 42 for addiction counselors. I'm not sure about behavior
Analysts.
If they have a consistent provision that I think most all other professions do, then it would be duplicative in that situation.
So you're saying it's duplicative of row 43, double P and double Q?
Yeah, so I mean, it's broader. I mean, it
Mhm.
says that you've practiced in violation of the act or any regulations. That provision is specific to unprofessional conduct, but that would be a regulation of the board, the unprofessional conduct regulation. And it looks like behavior analysts have a similar, it pertains to any other person regulated by the board or applying for licensure, has violated any provision of the act or any implementing regulation. That may be a little bit different.
Since we have a advisory committee meeting coming up here quickly, could we look at these in that meeting and see how we can collapse them so they can be more uniform across the professions while at the same time addressing the intent?
So I think that could be done. Usually right now, once the items have gone through the advisory committees, they would just be talked about at the board level. But
Okay,
given that
good. I'm good.
They sort of were identified as sort of being separate from the rest, but we can take a look at this. I'll make a note here, and we can kind of look at this offline too to see if it's already covered or if it's duplicative. So.
Failing to file a.
But do you just want to, maybe we can table this item for now and just verify how different the language is and then come back to it?
Okay. Everybody all right with that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay. Item 43. So this is an item in most of the professions. It was not identified under psychology nor social work. It says intentionally or negligently failing to file a report or record required by state or federal law willfully impeding or obstructing another person from filing a report or record that is required by state or federal law, or inducing another person to take any of these actions. And for the master's level psychology advisory committee, there was a recommendation to strike the phrase that required it to be intentionally or negligently in terms of failing to file a report or record. And I seem to recall the reason for striking that was because we were having a conversation about the term negligent and whether that would carry forward some sort of a legal analysis to meet the definition of the word negligent. And I believe there were some different alternatives that were being discussed, and ultimately the committee decided, what if we just struck this and said, if you fail to file a report or record required by state or federal law, or you do the rest of it as it was worded. I think for the other professions, the language is very similar. So I'll turn it over to all of you for discussion. Is this something that you'd like for there to be standard language? And then is it something for the two professions where it's not listed? Is this something that would be appropriate to have added so it's there for all the professions?
Yeah, I think that it's appropriate to be added. I'm surprised that licensed psychology does not have that as a regulation anywhere.
Because, I'm sorry.
No,
Because,
that was it.
go ahead.
I'm sorry, Andre, I couldn't hear you. What was your comment?
No, I was just agreeing with Richard. Sorry that I was surprised that social work wasn't included as well.
My question is, because if most of them, or they all start with intentionally or negligently failing to file a report, is there ever a case where it would be appropriate to not file a report? Because if not, then, you could definitely, if it's failing to file a report regardless of any circumstance, then I think taking out intentionally or negligently makes sense.
And I don't know.
Agree, parsimony, right? Keep it simple and clear.
Yeah, and I don't know if this ties to a specific reference in law that required sort of a higher duty, because willfully impeding or obstructing does tend to show, really, this was not an accident. I'm not sure if negligently is the right word based on what we talked about, but it seems like one of the reasons this was in here with this specific language was it was trying to show that this was not a mere accident that these things occurred, but it was someone doing these things with purpose. So maybe it's, but you bring up a good question, Denise. Of examples where someone would fail to follow a report or record required by state or federal law for a reason, but I'm curious what you all think as far as the advisory committee that recommended removing that language, or it sounds like there is consensus to have this across for all 7 professions. And now it is the specific language.
Yeah, and I mean, this is cross, for lack of appropriate language, end users, because this would apply if my supervisee if caught me doing something wrong and I coerced them into not filing a report. It would also apply if I was having sex with a client and I used that power differential to prevent them from filing a report against me. So 2 completely different categories of people, except for the fact that I have some kind of perceived or real power over them. I believe that's the intent of this. Does that sound right to you guys?
Yeah, I think both of those examples would apply. in my experience, I think the primary example we see is, you know, a mandatory reporter obligation that's not met. That's a pretty standard example that comes before the complaint review committee. And in that situation, I think, you know, the standard is laid out, you know, in the law as to whether or not, you know, you're required to report. You know, to the extent that it would constitute a crime, you know, it would have to be an intentional or, you know, willful knowing failure to report. But that's not necessarily, I think, something that, you know, the board should be concerned about. That's a separate issue. I think you're, you know, under that example, you're concerned about, you know, did they or did they not comply with what the law requires? And if they didn't, then that would trigger the violation.
To that point, Tim, does it make sense then to not include the intentional or negligent language? Because you're just saying, did they do what they were supposed to do, or did they not do what they were supposed to do?
I think that makes good sense. I mean, the committee always will have discretion in reviewing the facts to determine, you know, here is a violation. Do we have sufficient mitigating circumstances to excuse the failure? You know, if they don't exist, then, you know, I think more often than not, the committee will exercise its discretion to find a violation and move forward. But I think it does make sense to, you know, leave it as a strict failure as opposed to trying to institute a, you know, a knowing or negligent standard there.
Everybody comfortable with that?
Yeah.
All right.
Okay, great. Well, I think, given the other items on the new business and other things, it's maybe a good place to stop.
Sure.
But appreciate you all continuing to work through these. We'll have another set for you at the next board meeting, but good discussion and thanks for your participation in this.
Yeah, very good. Making slow but steady progress. Okay, that takes us to continued review and discussion of draft survey report.
Okay, and I just have just a note on this, and I already mentioned this earlier. Those draft survey reports are in the works, and I mentioned the 3 new sections that are being added to those reports. When those are ready to be reviewed, we will send something out to everyone, including all the licensees that took the surveys and thanking them for their responses. And we'll also be distributing those survey reports to the relevant associations to share with them as well. So we will let you know, but just kind of wanted to share our current direction. And I think those new sections will be helpful in terms of taking all the information and then saying, okay, we have this information. Now what should we do with it? Or what can we make from this? And then we can continue to have conversations going forward too.
Okay. Any questions or comments on that? All right, seeing none, we'll move to new business. Review of recommendation from Licensed Psychology Advisory Committee to provide public comment in support of proposed SIPAC rule capping yearly assessment.
Okay. And Richard, would you like me to go ahead and summarize this recommendation from the Licensed Psychology Advisory Committee? Or would you like to talk about it?
Sure, go ahead, and I can add anything in terms of perspective on this.
Okay, great. Well, there is, for that multi-state compact for psychologists, SIPAC, there is a rule out for public comment. We brought this to the Psychology Advisory Committee. Essentially, if one of the ways that that compact is funded is anyone who has a home state and practices under that compact, the compact at the end of the calendar year looks back, and let's say that there were 110 or 120 people in Kansas practicing under SIPAC authority, and they have a home state license in Kansas. At the end of the calendar year, they will look back and say there were 120 people, home state license of Kansas, practicing under SIPAC. We will charge the state of Kansas $10 per person who fit that criteria, and that bill will be sent to the BSRB to pay on behalf of the state of Kansas. Well, SIPAC has been enacted in a number of states, but there are still some very large states that they are trying to add to the compact. One of those, I believe, New York, maybe California as well. And so one of the proposed rules would say that yearly assessment is going to be capped at $6,000 per year, regardless of how many people are practicing with a home state license in that jurisdiction. So for example, in Kansas, if there were 100 people, the look back 100 people times $10 would be $1,000 charged to the BSRB every year, and we would absorb that cost on behalf of the state of Kansas. So in this situation, if there were more than 600 people practicing from a state, the maximum amount that assessment could be would be $6,000 if this rule change is enacted. So SIPAC put that out for public comment. It was discussed by the Licensed Psychology Advisory Committee. They were in favor of capping this assessment at $6,000 per year. And then they made a recommendation to the board for you all, asking for your support. And if you are supportive of this, then I will go forward and provide public comment on behalf of Kansas in support of that yearly cap rule.
Okay. Questions or comments? Liz or Laura?
Yes, I do have a question. Thank you. How, as I understand it, we're not really worried about a $6,000 cap. It's or reaching $6,000. It's just a matter of we need to put some guidelines around it. Is that what I understand?
Yeah, for the state of Kansas, unless we see a large increase in our psychologists who would want to practice under this, we're not going to come close to the cap. But I do think it's probably a good idea to have a responsible limitation. In terms of, also it could be a nice tool to encourage additional states to sign up to be part of the compact. So this may be helpful in terms of those states, get them on board the compact as well.
Terrific.
Linda?
I just have a question. Does this apply to both masters and PhD level, or is this PhD only?
This would be PhD only. The way that it was written was just for PhD level psychologists and just in the United States. So it's a multi-state compact for the United States. So it doesn't include the Canadian and it also doesn't include any practitioners of that level. So it wouldn't include master's level psychologists.
I don't have anything to add. I think that you explained what we discussed last week really well.
I guess what I would say before the board is there consensus from you all? Would you be supportive of me going forward and having public comment on behalf of Kansas in support of this rule for the SIPAC Commission? Good. There appears to be consensus based on head nods. So as much as possible, I try to represent your interest if there's no time, but when there is time to bring these things forward, I'd like to bring them to you for your ability to weigh in on. So thank you for giving me direction, and I'll provide that support in favor of that rule.
All right. Next, we'll move to a review of recommended changes to regulations from the advisory committees.
Okay. So this will largely be Leslie Allen, the Assistant Director and Licensing Manager for the BSRB, walking through these, but a lot of work has been done recently in the advisory committees reviewing regulations that maybe have not had a significant amount of review in recent years. But some of these we wanted to bring before the advisory committees for minor adjustments in language or to sync up with bills that have passed. And so Leslie is going to walk through the packets that you have, one for each profession. And instead of sharing my screen and trying to go through every single regulation, I'll just ask Leslie to start with one profession, identify which regulation she's reviewing, and then we'll probably have Leslie go through the recommended changes for all regulations for that profession. And then we'll pause and see if the board has any questions, if there's any discussion, or if there is support for moving these recommended changes forward based on the recommendations of the advisory committees.
Okay.
I'll turn it over to Leslie.
Okay, so I'm going to start with behavior analysts. 102-8-7, and the changes in this regulation are just removing the term late renewal and replacing it with reinstatement. And 102-8-8, which is the renewal audit. And in all audit regulations, we have added proof allowing people to upload their documents to someone like CE Broker, proof that the licensee has completed all continuing education requirements claimed, for credit during the current renewal period for using a third-party continuing education transcript retention service approved by the board. So that'll be in all of the audit regulations coming up. And those are the only two. Oh, and changing the word, changing the originals to copies of the continuing education document because we don't want originals anymore.
Unless you want us to send it in, Leslie. Unless you want us to send it all in.
Right, yeah.
I was kidding. Just because there's so much, right?
Been getting a lot of things by email and it's made life a lot easier.
So are there any objections from the board members or any
No.
questions on these proposed recommended changes? Okay. If there's no opposition, then it appears to be there is consensus to move these forward. So we will move these items forward to the Department of Administration for review and let you know if they have any questions or the Attorney General's office after that, but we'll move these forward. I'll turn it back over to Leslie.
Okay, the next profession is licensed psychology. And the first regulation is 102-1-3 little a. And I will say in the first, in A there, I have postgraduate and postdoctoral. So we're scratching postgraduate. We are changing postgraduate to postdoctoral throughout the regulation because that's the language we use. We're adding the requirement that if they don't have 4 supervisors, they have to submit professional references. So there is a total of 4 people or 4 licensees sending recommendations for the person to become licensed. Changing the pre-doctoral supervised experience to the pre-doctoral supervised internship, and that's throughout. And we're changing the language. They used to use all professional references. That's what they titled all their documents. So I've changed it to attestations from the supervisors. And then, at the end of the regulation, it talks about extenuating circumstances. And the definition was in the regulation. I deleted that and said extenuating circumstances as defined in KR 102.1.1, because every profession now has extenuating circumstances defined in their definition regulation.
And Leslie, just to clarify on that. If we're looking at 102-1-3A, correct?
Yes.
It looks like the previous language had exigent circumstances,
Oh, yes.
and you're just replacing that with the extenuating circumstances.
Yes.
Okay.
Sorry.
And on that first page, you mentioned that there was both the word postgraduate and postdoctoral, but the postgraduate should have a line struck through it, right? It's just supposed to say postdoctoral.
Yes. I just messed up when I was formatting the strike through and the underline.
I thought I had heard that right, but just in case there were any questions, I thought I'd clarify that. So, okay. So that is all the recommended changes for 102-1-3A.
Yes.
Okay.
There's language about how we would send the forms to the supervisors and then the supervisors would send them back, but that's not how we do it anymore. So that's all been removed. The next regulation is 102-1-8, which is renewal and reinstatement. And in B3, it's been struck because it's talking about taking the exam, and that is not a requirement that we use. If we did that, it would be in an order. Changing some of the renewal language to reinstatement because it would be after the expiration of the license. And then adding that if the license has been expired for 1 year or less, then they have to pay the late renewal fee. That would be all the changes in that regulation.
Okay, and Leslie, also in 102-1-8 under B3, I think it previously said in the regulation, or currently says that we're striking that the fee for the examination would have been provided to the board, right?
Right,
But since that's not how that logistically works, then that's being removed.
yes.
Gonna go ahead to 102-1-8A.
That's the renewal audit, and we've changed originals to copies and added the language that they can use a service to upload all their documents if it's approved by the board.
Good.
And this one, I'm sorry, this one doesn't have the language yet because we were looking for the date of the statute being removed.
You're talking about 102-1-11?
Yes.
Okay.
So, do you want me to tell them what that would be or just bring it back with the next group?
Do we have that date now?
It's July 1st of 2009?
Okay,
No. 2004.
2004. That sounds right.
Right. So in 2004, the board removed the statute that allowed licensed psychologists to have unlicensed assistants approved by the board. But they left this 102-1-11 in place because those who were already registered with the board, they could continue using them, and this has the language of what they need to do while they're supervising them. So because we get a lot of questions about adding a new unlicensed assistant, I would suggested adding language that says to utilize unlicensed assistants, comma, as registered with the board prior to July 1st, 2004 for psychological services. And that would be the only change in that regulation.
And Linda, I saw your hand was up.
Yeah, boy, that was fast of you to see my hand shoot up like that. So how does this factor into the other one that we were looking at, where we talk about the supervision of students? Do they like conflict with each other if we're no longer allowed to use unlicensed assistants?
These are people that the board used to register. Just would send us information. They weren't students. They were, I mean, they could have been, but they, not necessarily. They were already educated and they just practiced under the psychologist.
And so by getting rid of this, or looking at that July 1, 2004 date, all that means is that when I have students in my employ that are helping me, I don't have to register them with the board.
That is correct.
Okay.
And I apologize, there's subsection C, which is the last paragraph in that regulation, and it's speaking to pre-doctoral or postdoctoral experience, those people being unlicensed assistants, and they are not any longer considered unlicensed assistants. So that whole section needs to be struck.
Okay, so even though there's no markings on the paper,
yes,
what's before the board for consideration would be striking little section C and then adding some language to A that just clarifies that this regulation, as it relates to unlicensed assistants, is meant to refer to the closed group that were made unlicensed assistants as of when that statute was struck, which was when striking the statute became effective, which would be July 1st of 2004. So if anyone saw this regulation on its own, they wouldn't get confused thinking they could make new unlicensed assistants. but it would provide clarity if there's any that are still out there from prior to July 1st of 2004. This is how you would want them to be handled for us.
Correct.
Why don't you go ahead and do 102-1-18.
And that's the referral to the DSM. And all we're doing is adding after 5th edition, comma, text revision. Because there is a new book. And that's the only change in that regulation.
And that addresses the DSM 5-TR, the text revision.
Mm-hmm.
Any questions from members of the board about these proposed changes to the regulations for licensed psychology? Is there any opposition from members of the board as far as approving these recommended changes and having them be moved forward? Okay.
We didn't discuss 102-1-14. The group service one.
Oh, 102-1-14 is not in here because, well, I'm not sure, but, the committee recommended
To strike the whole thing, right?
to repeal that regulation. I can bring it to the next board meeting. I just didn't include it in my PDF. I apologize.
Oh, no problem.
I think we'll probably have a few more that'll be working their way through, so let's just bring that one back to this meeting. It seemed like there was consensus to move these forward. And then can take that as consensus from the board to move these forward for the licensed psychology profession. I'll turn it back over to for the next packet, which is for marriage and family therapists, starting with 102-5-4A.
So in 102-5-4A, the first change is on page 5. E as in Edward, we're striking some language because the sum is being deleted. We're deleting that a temporary license shall expire after 6 months if the applicant has not taken the exam. That has been removed from statute because it was very difficult to keep track of who had sat for the exam and who didn't. So, and then B as in boy was saying that any, sorry, that anyone who didn't take the exam within 6 months could request that it remain active for 12 months, but that's no longer an issue. So all of the references to temporary licenses are now 24 months. And if you go down into F, it's again 24 months. And extenuating circumstances as defined in 102-5-1 in the definition regulation. And the definition of extenuating circumstances is being struck in subsection G, as in goat. Numbers 1 and 2, that's all being deleted.
Move on.
Okay. 102-5-4B as in boy, that is the reciprocity application. And the changes start on page 2. We're striking language that was talking about 5 years immediately preceding the date of application because the reciprocity statute now says they have to have been licensed for 12 months. And we're adding the word related field after the degree because their statute was changed to allow a related degree. And that the applicant has to submit proof that they have held a license for at least the 12 months immediately preceding when they apply through reciprocity, and the license has to be with a similar scope of practice. And that's all for that regulation. So it's basically just the time, how long they have to have been licensed and what they need to submit was changed. Okay, 102-5-5 is the exam regulation. I've added language that allows a licensed marriage and family therapist who did not pass the exam at the pass point, that they can sit for the exam again prior to making application for the clinical level of license, because they take the same exam for both levels of license. And technically, to be licensed as an LMFT, they can score 12 points below the pass point. So it's just allowing them to sit before they finish their hours and have to reapply for the LCMFT. That's all there is for that regulation. 102-5-6A, we want to repeal this regulation because it was licensure without examination, and the dates are on or before January of 97, but before July 1st of 98. So it really doesn't apply to anyone currently. 102-5-9 is renewal and reinstatement. And I've added the language about having the late charge if the license has been expired for 1 year or less, and changing renew to reinstate if they're applying after their license has expired.
Leslie?
Yeah.
On page 3,
Mm-hmm.
number, I just saw it. Oh, number 2, the required renewal fee, would it be renewal and late charge? Or is it reinstatement fee?
They're paying the renewal fee.
Okay.
For reinstatement, but it still refers back to the renewal fee because that's how the fee regulation is set up.
Okay.
And that would be all the changes in that regulation. The next one is 102-5-9A, and it's the audit regulation, and we've removed originals, put copies, and allowing them to use CE broker or another program approved by the board. That's all the changes in that. 102-5-14 is the DSM referral, and we're just adding after 5th edition text revision to show that we're using the most current DSM.
Any questions from board members as far as these recommended changes? Is there any objection from any board members as far as these being moved forward as recommended changes by the board? I don't see any, so there appears to be consensus. These recommended changes from the advisory committee will move forward as board recommended changes. And I'll turn it back over to Leslie and she can talk about the next packet, which starts with 102-3-4A.
So 102-3-4A is the application for licensure. And the changes start on page 4. And there's language added to show that if a person is applying for a clinical level of professional counseling and they did not have 280 hours of clinical practice in their practicum and internship, that they can make up the deficit to bring the total up to 280, and that's added to the postgraduate hours, and the additional hours are added to the 3,000 that is required for clinical license. Adding language for extenuating circumstances as defined in the definition regulation for each profession. Changing the length of the temporary license to 24 months. and removing the definition of extenuating circumstances at the end of the regulation, since it's being looked at the definition regulation instead of this. That's all the changes in that one. The next one is 102-3-4B as in boy. It's the reciprocity application, the same changes. Professional counseling. I need to add a comma or related field for the degree that they have to have. Because the statute was changed, removing the requirement for the 5 years of practice, and that they have to show proof that they've been licensed for 12 months immediately preceding the application. And that's it for reciprocity. And then the next regulation is 102-3-9A, renewal and reinstatement. If the license has been expired for 1 year or less, there's the late fee is required, changing renewal when it's used after expiration to reinstatement. And I think that's it for that regulation. And then 102-3-9B as in boy is renewal audit. We've added copies instead of originals and added that they can upload their documents to CE Broker. A platform like CE Broker. And then that's all there is for that. 102-3-15 is the DSM referral source, adding the words text revision to the 5th edition. And then 102-3-17, they want to repeal this regulation because it's defining a day and that's already defined in the statute.
Okay. Any questions on these recommended changes? Is there any board members opposed to be moving these forward as recommended changes? I don't see any opposition, so it appears to be there's consensus to move these recommended changes for professional counseling forward as board recommended changes. Leslie, I'll turn it back over to you for 102-4-4A.
So this is the application for licensure for master's level psychology. The changes begin. This one doesn't have the pages. Sorry. In subsection E as in Edward. And they also had a requirement to take the exam within a certain amount of time after getting their temporary license. And that is being removed. And saying that licenses will be in effect for 24 months. And the definition for extenuating circumstances, we're telling them as defined in the definition regulation. And then removing the definition at the end of the regulation for extenuating circumstances. Those are the only changes. 102-4-4B is the reciprocity application regulation. It has the same changes, removing the 5-year requirement of practice, changing it to 1 year with a similar scope of practice for the license. And I did in, let's see, subsection C, 1B as in boy on page 4. I changed, it says the applicant passed a national clinical examination. I changed that. I struck clinical and said that they passed at the independent level approved by the board because that's what the EPPP, they have an independent level pass rate and a supervised practice pass rate. So it is the language that's appropriate for that profession. That is all the changes in that. 102-4-5A is the exam. And we're changing the 60% to a scaled score of at least 400. And kind of renumbering so that we could add in that an LMLP who is licensed by the board can request to sit for the exam before they finish their hours if they have not passed with a score of 500 or more. And in subsection D as in dog, it's being stricken because it talks about deadlines and fees paid to the board for the exam, which we no longer do. And then adding in subsection E that an applicant or licensee has to have at least met the education requirements before they can sit for the exam. That's all there is in that regulation. 102-4-6A is the academically supervised practicum for master's level psychology. And I added the language as defined in KR 102-41A because the practicum is not limited to practicum, and the definition says a practicum can include internship, practicum, and other educational supervised practice. I don't have it in front of me, but and then it's talking, well, that's and then on page 3, we're adding that the supervision can occur either in person or via video conferencing. And that's all the changes for that regulation. 102-4-6B, as in boy, is postgraduate hours in lieu of a practicum. Again, I link back the practicum as defined in the definition regulation and direct client contact as defined in the regulation. And then in subsection C, changing 4,000 to 3,000 for the clinical license. The hour requirement for the clinical license. 102-4-9, renewal and reinstatement. Striking each applicant who doesn't meet the reinstatement deadline because many moons ago, apparently LMLPs could only reinstate within a certain amount of time. That has since been changed. They can reinstate just like everyone else. And changing the renewal to reinstatement if it's after the license has expired. The next regulation is 102-4-9B, the renewal audit, the same changes, copies instead of originals, and using an outside source to upload your documents for your CEUs. And the final regulation is 102-4-15, designation of the DSM, and we're just adding text revision to that book.
Any questions about those recommended changes for the master's level psychology profession? Is there any opposition from board members concerning these recommended changes? Okay, if not, it appears there's consensus from the board to move these forward as recommended changes. So we will move these forward to the Department of Administration for review. And then the last one is we have one recommendation change from social work. We still have a number to review with that committee, but we wanted to go ahead and take what we could to you today. So that is 102-2-2A. Turn it back over to Lisa.
Okay, so we're changing the language in all regulations when it says to ask for applications from the executive director to that they need to request forms from the board because Dave's not going to answer all those calls. And then in this regulation, the changes that are being made is that if a person who is an LMSW and then applies for the LSCSW, that they, do not have to submit professional references. So for most of the other professions, if they're already licensed, they only have to complete the supervisor attestations from their postgraduate supervisors. And in those attestations are similar questions to the professional references, but social work has to still submit references. And so we're striking that requirement to bring them in line with all the other professions.
So
I need to fix double I. Double I shouldn't be completely struck. It should be, if not previously, both of them, if not previously provided to the board, that they have to submit those two things.
and what you're describing verbally is the version that was approved by the advisory committee.
Yes.
Any questions from members of the board? Is there any opposition to this recommended change for regulation? If not, it appears as consensus to move this forward. So thank you. I know this is a tedious process to go through all these recommended changes, but I think the legislature will appreciate our responsiveness in making sure we have good regulations. So we'll bring more forward to you as the advisory committees continue to review these.
Thank you for staying awake through this process.
Thank you, Leslie and Dave. And I too want to just share my appreciation to the advisory committees on all their hard work on this. I think it, as Dave has mentioned, it's been a really good process to review these and update them. So please send our thanks to your advisory committee.
We're short on time.
We are very short on time.
Do you mind if we go to item D?
Sure.
Okay. So we're going to move next to item D under new business. It's titled Discussion of 2021 BSRB Policy Statement on Publication of Disciplinary Actions. And so in your packet of material, you will see the statement of the board in terms of the policy statement on what gets published to the disciplinary section of the BSRB website. It mentions here that the publication of disciplinary action, this policy was initially approved by the board back in 2002. There's been a few different amendments to it. So I'll talk about the version you have in your packet, which was agreed upon September 27th, 2021. But for reference, if you do want to see past versions of it, there's also the previous versions, which are posted under the policy section of the website. And for the purposes of our conversation today, the relevant parts are similar between the two different versions I'll be discussing here. But essentially, from time to time, there are questions about what gets posted on the website for the BSRB. And what this document says is basically the purpose of the BSRB and the importance and the intent of the Kansas legislature is to protect and serve consumers of services offered by BSRB licensees. And it shows the mission of the board. In terms of issuing licenses, resolution of complaints, and creation of appropriate regulations accomplished through efficiency, fairness, and respect to all those involved, the citizens of the state of Kansas, the consumers served by the BSRB licensees, and the individuals that we license have an interest in being informed when disciplinary action, including but not limited to the denial, conditioning, or limiting of a license, the revocation or suspension of a license, or the public censure of a licensee has been taken by the board. And so the reason I'm bringing this to you and kind of citing these policy documents and their history is we had an individual contact me, basically asking, citing the board's publication policy. This was someone who previously had a disciplinary violation. They had terms of an order that were agreed upon from the board. This was several years back. They satisfied the terms of that order, and they were asking, would there be a chance the board would consider changing its policy from having the orders posted on the board's website to, instead of that, having essentially a note that there had been past disciplinary conduct, but not the entire order posted. And so I wanted to bring this to your attention because while it did come up for one individual person, this is more of a broad policy. as it relates to a lot of different individuals who have had previous disciplinary conduct and our website posting policy, but also because it would affect a broad group of people in the future as well. And so the question is, is this something the board would want to consider making a change to? I can tell you, I have looked to other states to see, is this a common practice of posting disciplinary violations to those boards' website? And what I have found is yes, other states usually have postings of disciplinary violations, and they stay up on the website even after completion of those is done. And this does fit in with the board's policy in terms of the public protection mission of the board. However, since this was brought to my attention and was made as a request, I wanted to bring it to you to see if this is something that you would want to consider changing the policy on. But also, since some of you may be newer members of the board, you maybe joined the board before this conversation was discussed back in 2021. So I just kind of wanted to lay out a little bit of the history. But the board has been posting disciplinary violations to the disciplinary section of the board's website for several years, due to the public protection mission of the board, and just kind of wanted to inform you of why we do what we do, let you know that this does appear to be a common practice between other states in terms of other professions that regulate the same professions we do. Are there exceptions that do not post the entire order? Yes. So there are limited exceptions, but based on my review, it appears that these are limited. So I'll open it up for any board questions, but I thought I'd make this a broad topic of conversation to see if you have any questions about our posting policy, or to see if you have any interest in revisiting this topic for any changes.
Jim?
I have a question.
Jim, did you have a comment?
Well, I guess if I think from a public disclosure perspective, we have a responsibility to make sure that anybody looking doesn't have to go through 6 gyrations of search patterns to find out if the person they are going to for professional help has any issues. And then even if we did restrict it, I'm going to assume that they would then have to file some kind of freedom of information paperwork. So ultimately it gets released. I'm not sure why we would want to not be transparent to the public. So I am for the continued transparency to the public when it comes to these types of issues.
So I'm going to throw a caveat out to that, Jim. And I'm going to say, let's say we had a young therapist that came on and they had something filed against them, and it had to do with the delivery of health care, like maybe there was a confidentiality breach or something. They satisfied all the terms of their condition, and 20 years has passed, and they've not had any other violations. Do we continue to put on the public-facing website something that happened 20 years ago, and it was the only violation they ever had, and they were compliant and were apologetic and changed their ways?
Yeah, I do appreciate that perspective and that particular scenario. However, I think it's up to the public then to decide again whether or not they want to engage with that professional knowing the full history. I don't believe we should be hiding the full history. I believe that most people probably 20 years ago, as actions on this board, when we look at licensing people that have had issues, whether they're law or others, and have issues and applied for licensing, we take the time into consideration. I believe most people in the public would do that as well, or at least I hope they will. So
I'm
my
in
goal
agreement
is,
with Jim. I'm in agreement with Jim on this one. I do think that's the intent of what we do. And if we start creating caveats or other exceptions, it just becomes very convoluted. And to that last point, I think that's a public judgment. Then if I'm wanting to see somebody who had something that happened 20 years ago, that's mine to do. But I do think it does serve sort of the all or none policy here in my mind.
Thank you. Other comments?
I agree with Mary and with Jim. I think we need to be transparent and we need to be consistent and again, let the public decide.
I agree with that also.
Any other feedback?
Just to be clear, I wasn't disagreeing with it. I was just throwing out an alternative.
And I did not take your talk to me as disagreeing. I like the
Okay.
discussion piece. That's why we're here.
I
So-
also agree, but is there a potential time frame where a violation would no longer be available on the website? Again, I agree with protecting the public and this
Mhm.
being available. But like 10 years, 15 years, 20 years. Or is it's just out there forever and that's acceptable, that's a thing too.
Or would there be a process by which they could request that it be expunged, like in the legal system? And I imagine that that would make a headache for the board and Tim, because there would have to be a definition around that, like what would have been considered egregious versus that needs to remain in the public purview versus something that was relatively minor, but was clearly in violation.
Yeah, I'm thinking about that and thinking about timeframes and thinking about how that, how does that come up against our core responsibility of protecting the public? Are we protecting the public if we, even after a time frame, take
Right.
those things away from the public record?
Yeah.
Yeah, there currently is not an expungement process. That would need to be a change made by statute.
Mhm.
I've heard some rumors about discussion on that topic, but that would need to be something the legislature puts in place. The board wouldn't have the ability to do that. If the board wanted to pursue a path like that, it likely would be reconsideration, and that wouldn't seem to be a logical way to approach that. So I think that's likely what you're left with, is see if the excuse me, if the legislature makes that type of change in the future.
So I appreciate you having this discussion. It appears to be that there is support for keeping the current position of the board's posting policy on disciplinary actions. So I will just follow up with the person who had raised this issue and say that the board wishes to continue the current website posting policy, and I'll forward a copy of that to them. So thank you for your discussion.
Does it make sense, Dave, to table the discussion on alternate pathways to licensure? And in terms of the discussion on a strategic plan, some more information will be coming out to you prior to our next meeting, but our plan will be when we meet in March to start the SWOT analysis, and we'll send you some more information about that. Is that okay?
Sounds great.
All right. Just a reminder for those who haven't sent me Dave's performance eval, if you would kindly do that, I would appreciate it. My plan is to have that all summarized and to you all for review and approval at the next time we meet, which would be March 9th, 2026 at 10 a.m. Anything else to come before the board? If not, I'd accept a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. Motion carries.
Hi,
Good
everyone.
to
Bye, everybody.
Aye.
Thanks,
Thank
everyone.
you. Hopefully we'll all have voices by then.
Yeah. So David, is it,